everyone. So another snow day, or at least a snow delay, and we need to make up that material that we would have otherwise gone through in lecture. If you are watching this video, I am assuming that you have already watched all of the videos from the first lecture. If you have not, stop this now, go back and watch those. This lecture is going to pick up right where that last one left off. I'm also using the same PowerPoint slides in the PowerPoint document that you can find on Blackboard. Just to go over some announcements, these are the same announcements that I gave you in the last video. The Pecha Kucha information, that's the project that you have due this semester, that information is posted. It's in a Pecha Kucha folder on Blackboard. There is an intro video. Be sure to watch that so that you can ask me any questions in class next week. After today's lecture material, I'm going to make a review quiz and post that on Blackboard. The information about those quizzes can be found in the folder on Blackboard. All of these quizzes are going to be in the assignments folder. So head over to the assignments folders, you'll find the review quiz. That won't be due until Sunday evening, so pretty much right before next Monday's class. Honestly, I recommend doing it a little bit later. It's meant to help recap the material before class on Monday. But it doesn't matter when you do it, as long as you do it Sunday at 6. And then finally, we should be having class on Friday. There's no snowstorms or anything like that. We'll start with that lab quiz, and then we'll continue with the lab activities. If you have any questions, you can email me at any time. So let's go ahead and get started. Last class, or last video lecture, we started talking about, we finished talking about biological hierarchy. We talked about individual organisms and the classifications of those organisms. We had producers, which undergo photosynthesis. We have consumers that undergo cellular respiration. And then we have decomposers. Don't forget, both decomposers and producers also undergo cellular respiration. So now we're going to talk about the relationships between those organisms, between producers and consumers, and even decomposers. And one way we can look at those relationships is looking at a food chain or a trophic pyramid. You've probably heard of food chains before. Really, all you're trying to figure out is who is eating who. Who is at the top of the food chain? Who is at the bottom of the food chain? Now, trophic pyramid may be a different terminology for you. I'm going to use both of those interchangeably. What we see here is a trophic pyramid. You can see that pyramid shape. We'll talk more about that pyramid shape in a little bit. Trophic is referring to each one of these levels. They're called trophic levels. Essentially the same thing as feeding levels. So each level, here we have producers and various types of consumers. That is an individual trophic level. So if I were to ask you how many trophic levels are here, you would say 5. We have 5 different parts of this trophic pyramid. We could also draw this out in food chain form, and each individual organism would be considered an individual trophic level. So let's break down this trophic level, or this food chain. At the base of every single food chain, whether it's a food chain on land, whether it's a food chain in the water, or anywhere on Earth, every single food chain and every single trophic pyramid starts with producers. Main reason why is they get their energy from the sun. So they don't need to eat anything else. They are making that first line of energy. We as consumers cannot get our energy from the sun. Only producers can. So producers are at the base of every single food chain. Now there's lots of different producers. You might have grasses or bushes like you see in this image. Thinking about the aquatic food chain, you might see algae or phytoplankton. Don't forget that word, phytoplankton. Bacteria, some of them are producers. But no matter what, producers will always be at the bottom of a trophic pyramid or a food chain. And just recall what you need for photosynthesis. You need solar energy, you need carbon dioxide and water. So the base of every food chain. Now the next level up, so we've gotten rid of all of our producers. Now what's left is our consumers. But not all consumers are equal. If you think about here we have bees or caterpillars, they're a different kind of consumer than saying a shark. A shark usually at the top of the food chain, caterpillars pretty much right at the bottom. We actually have a way of denoting that. We call them primary consumers. Primary meaning first. They are the first consumer in a food chain, or the first consumer in a trophic pyramid. These guys are herbivores. They are eating producers. They are eating just herbs or plants. So these guys, primary consumers. One way to shorthand that, I'm going to draw here, is I have this 1 referring to primary or first, and then this little degree symbol that denotes primary. So we have our primary consumers. And again, these are going to be our herbivores. Now, next tier up, secondary. Secondary consumers eat primary consumers. So we're going a little bit higher. In this example, we have rats, we have birds, we have toads. These guys are eating those caterpillars, those butterflies, those insects. So I'm going to mark these with a 2 and then that degree symbol, and that denotes secondary. And I'll show you why this little shorthand form is kind of important. Now, I have up here they can be carnivores and some of them are even omnivores. The reason is think about humans. We eat plants, so that would make us a primary consumer, but we also eat meat. So that would make us a secondary consumer. So what is it? Well, think about us. So I'm going to draw here as humans, and we eat these guys. That would make us secondary. But we also eat these guys. We eat those producers. That makes us primary. So you can actually fit into multiple roles. And we'll touch on that again in a little bit. But I just want to make that note that a secondary consumer, they are not limited to only eating primary consumers. But at least in this food chain, we see this toad is going to eat this ant, which eats this grass. That makes it a secondary consumer. And it just goes up from there. If an organism like these snakes are eating a secondary consumer, that makes them a tertiary consumer. Here we have an osprey, so a bird of prey, that's eating snakes. So that's going to make it a quaternary consumer. You're not going to need to spell quaternary. The next one up is quintenary. Really, that's what these numbers are really nice because you can just use those numbers. I know what you're trying to say. So again, we're saying is you have your producers always at the bottom. Whatever eats them, primary consumers. Whatever eats a primary consumer, eats a secondary consumer, so on and so forth. And depending on what that organism is eating, it might fit into multiple trophic levels. We'll talk about that in another video. So thinking about the organisms, we actually didn't mention someone. We talked about our producers and photosynthesis. We talked about our consumers, but we kind of left someone out. We left out these guys, our decomposers. We talked about them earlier. We know they're really important, but we didn't see them in a food chain or a trophic period. You're never ever going to see a picture of a vulture like in there at all. The reason is because they only eat dead things. But a food chain is representing live interactions. So although the decomposers are kind of like not pictured at all and that kind of seems sad for them, they're actually incredibly important. First of all, they remove the remains of organisms. Think about roadkill. Yes, we do have trucks that go out and pick out roadkill, but imagine areas that don't have those trucks, areas in the country. That roadkill goes away because of vultures and bacteria and mushrooms and all sorts of decomposers. So without our decomposers, we just would lack, or we would have a surplus of just dead bodies and dead things all around. What's also really awesome about decomposers is, remember when we talked about earlier, they do undergo cellular respiration. They are still eating. You see these vultures here, they're eating a carcass. Well, there's nutrients in that carcass. So the energy in that dead organism goes to that vulture. And I'm actually going to draw that this way. So here's energy going to the vulture. I'm going to mark it with an E. But what's really nice about these guys is they're also going to recycle those nutrients back into the ecosystem. So they're going to poop, or thinking about bacteria, they also release wastes. They're going to poop, and I'm going to draw this just to the grass, out nutrients, which is so incredibly important. And sure, we do that too, but since they're decomposers, they're recycling the nutrients that are in dead things. We're recycling nutrients in, so to speak, in live things. So very, very important role. But the reason we don't see them in a food chain or in a trophic pyramid is just because they are eating dead things. They're eating things that are rotting. They are not predating, or they are not capturing prey. They're opportunists. They see a dead carcass, they eat it. They do not kill at all. And that's a very important distinction. So here we're going to take a pause for an activity. If you have your book, flip to page 1-8. You're going to see an image just like this. If you don't have your book, I've pretty much put the entire activity here. So the very first part of the activity is, here I have a trophic pyramid for you, and I give you 4 different species you see up here in the upper right. Now these species you need to put in this pyramid. So thinking about what you know about typical species interactions. If you really just have no idea, it's okay to Google it. Now once you've completed your trophic pyramid, there are 7 questions here. I kind of shorthanded it on this. If you have the book page, it goes in a little more detail. But the first question, who is an herbivore? Who is a carnivore? Who is photosynthesizing? How many types of consumers? If a secondary consumer dies, what happens? And so on and so forth. So go ahead and work on this activity now. We're actually getting close to the maximum amount of time for the video, so I'm actually going to stop this first video here. So once this video stops playing, work on this exercise. Once you have all of your answers written, then go ahead and start the next video. The very first thing I'll do in the next video is go over the answers. So go ahead and get started now.